I can't hear you. Can the rest of people hear him?
No, his sound is not coming through for some reason.
Yeah. Speak. Let's see. Still can't hear you. No. You want to check?
I think
Binti.
while we are waiting for Niji, you can start with
Binti, maybe you can unmute. Maybe we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, we can hear you. Great. Niji, you want to check your stuff to know why we can't hear you?
Blunt or
can you hear me now?
Let Binta go.
Okay.
Okay, Binti. It's not Binta, Pastor, it's Binti.
Yeah.
You want to read that?
Let her give her introductory remarks so
profile,
that we can go on. And then try and catch up with Niji to see what the problem is.
Okay.
I don't know if it's better now.
Okay, yeah,
it's better now.
Fantastic. Okay. Do you still want me to go or Binti should go?
Well, Binti can go. Binti, ladies first. Well, I should have called her first, quite frankly, but Binti, go then. You can come in later. Go ahead.
No problem.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Binti Shah. I'm based in Kenya. I'm a partner in ENS Africa, which is a law firm. It's the largest law firm in Africa. We've got branches in South Africa, Ghana, Mauritius, Namibia, Rwanda, Uganda, and in Kenya. So, my focus is predominantly finance and energy. So this is a topic very passionate to me. So very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're welcome, Binti. Okay, great to have you. Yeah, Niji.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly now.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So again, my name is Niji Oni. I'm a lawyer based in Nigeria and the partner of the principal of Niji Oni & Co. Corporate commercial is my area of specialization, and one of the areas we've focused on in the last couple of years is agriculture, which has led us into renewable energy, and that's why I'm very passionate about it. So, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for those very brief and short introduction. So just to break the ice, renewable energy and agriculture. Binti, do you want to go first? Renewable energy and agriculture, what's the relationship? What's the correlation? From what dimension do you want to connect it? Just so that our viewers, our listeners can have an idea of what we want to talk about. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself, sorry.
And in doing that, Niji, can you also give us a little expose as to what you think the challenges are with agriculture, especially in Africa, and the opportunities that we have and what we're probably losing as well?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, I think as the topic goes, renewable energy and agriculture, can they possibly coexist in any way, or is there any relationship? The simple answer is yes. And how has that come about? Maybe the simple example I can give as to the type of coexistence is agrovoltaics or agrivoltaics. And basically what they mean is a complementary way of having solar panel as a way to generate energy, clean energy, and at the same time provide some sort of protection for the soil or for the plants, as the case may be. If you permit me to, talk a little bit about some history. This was invented in 1981 by a German institute, whereby they brought about the solution to install energy or clean energy without limiting the land use. And as you rightly said, what brought about this problem, I ended up with talking about how the energy of the German institutes came about this solution as a way to also solve land issue. Now, in the world, Africa has about 65% of uncultivated agro land. And Nigeria actually has about 34 million hectares of land that is arable. So which shows in itself that we have substantial number of land for us to be able to grow any agro. And that doesn't mean that we have any, but however, the problem that we have is that in Nigeria, for example, is that we don't generate enough of electricity. And from estimates, we have about 8,415 gigawatts that was generated as of September 2023. So electricity has always been a problem in Nigeria, for example. And electricity is also a problem for agriculture, particularly in post-harvest. Nigeria is one of the highest is producing the highest tomato in Africa, or sub-Saharan Africa globally, and 14 in the entire world. But research shows that about 45% of them goes to waste. I would change that personally and make it 80%. So 80% of what is produced yearly actually goes to waste. And why? The simple answer is due to poor handling, storage facility. And if you look at most of the rural areas that you have, there's lack of electricity. And that is the reason why most of those agro produce that are being or the tomato, for example, do not actually make it to storage or to retail or for even final consumption. And even though the static says 45%, but I would give it 80%, as I said. However, with renewable energy and where most people know as solar panel, or as I would call it, agrovoltaics. In Nigeria, we have about 1,800 to 2,000 hours of sunlight on a daily basis. And if you look at the concept of sun, again, I'm not a scientist, but I try to find my way of understanding the science of sunlight. There are three major categories which you can look at. So you can look at the full sun, the partial sun, or the full shade. And there are different crops that actually have their limitations when it comes to the different types of sunlight that you may get. In Yobe State, the number of sun, it's almost as good as you having sun for about 10 hours on a daily basis in Yobe State. Now, what does that do? That will affect the soil. Now, once that affects the soil, because the soil is having a direct heat of sunlight, that way it will bring about some level of food scarcity, and they will not be able to produce agro-produce around the entire year. But if you introduce agrovoltaics, which is now the combination of renewable energy with agriculture, what that does is that you're able to put panels across the entire farmland. And in doing so, that panel is retaining some part of the energy and thereby protecting the crops that you want to plant or you want to grow around the entire year. And at the same time, you're also able to generate some level of energy that can be used for certain storage. In Arizona, for example, where cherry tomatoes is predominant, an introduction of agrovoltaics has brought about reduction in water consumption and increase in their yield. So having shared a panel with Bintu, I'm sure she's going to go through how some of those examples have been, and you can see the benefit of agrivoltaics and combination of renewable energy. I think I would pause for now, and if there are any further questions or any other thing, I can then speak on about it.
Yeah, Bintu, you can take your shot. Same question, your view.
Thank you. Basically, from a Kenyan law perspective, 80% of our electricity is generated from renewable sources, right? And by the way, Kenya is not alone in Africa. There's about 22 African countries that already utilize renewables as their main electricity source. You know, Central African Republic, DR Congo, Eswatini, Ethiopia, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, and Uganda. So, you know, a great part of Africa uses, you know, renewables, because after all, I mean, if you think about it, we have solar, you know, we have the sun, we have the wind, you know, we can harness, we have rivers, we can harness all sorts of renewable energies. And that would be sort of through solar plants, through wind power plants, through hydro plants, even geothermal. There's a lot of geothermal energy in Kenya. So on the one hand, we have great potential in Africa for renewable energies. On the other hand, if you're looking at agriculture, it's basically the backbone of the Kenyan economy. It contributes to 20% of Kenya's GDP, and it employs more than 40% of our total population and 70% of our rural population. So you can see there's a potential for conflict, I suppose you could say, unless we have some solutions, because the land that is attributed to power plants should, you know, the question is, does it impose on the land that is attributed to agricultural use? So in Kenya, they basically managed to, you know, control this sort of conflict through various ways. You know, location choice is one of them. So that's an interesting one, because if you think about it, you know, you've got lots of land in Kenya, lots of land in Nigeria, lots of land in Africa. Generally, you know, we're land rich. So you don't have much competition for agriculture, because, you know, you can have a power plant in the north and you can have agricultural activities elsewhere, etc. You know, even where your power plant is situated, for example, your wind power plant, you know, in Kenya, it's situated in arid areas where agriculture is not great. You can't really farm the land. Instead, maybe you can rear some livestock. So you know, we get around it that way. Like we have a wind power plant in the north of Kenya, where it's very arid, but because the wind turbines are so far apart, they've managed to grow, well, they've managed to rear livestock in between. So you know, there is no conflict from that perspective. The other way that we have tried to resolve any potential conflict is land use planning. So basically, we have legislation in place whereby we need to go, if it's agricultural land and it's been sort of identified as agricultural land by the government, we need to then go to our land control boards to say, you know, look, we want to use this as a power plant. Or, you know, and they need to look at the land, they need to see what economic benefit it has, do the balancing act essentially, and tell us that, yes, you can use it for a power plant, or no, you can't. So that, you know, some sort of legal regulation around that through our Land Control Act, as well as our Physical Planning Act, you know, when building, etc., they control it. So we have that as well to balance how they can coexist properly. The third way is through environmental impact assessments. So we have NEMA is our authority for and controls the sort of environmental part in Kenya, and they will turn around and say, well, you know, to maintain the coexistence, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So, for example, giving you the example of the power plant where it was a wind power plant in the north, it was very dusty. So they turned around and said, you need to put dust sheets around so that not to impact on the agricultural activities. The vehicles during the construction can only be driven at a particular speed so that, they don't go fast and dust doesn't blow anyway. Little examples like that. So that's how in Kenya, certainly, we've managed to control the way, the coexistence of power, renewable energies together with agriculture. But we have so many examples, as Niji was alleging, alluding to earlier. We have a wind power plant, which I've been talking about. So we had the dust control measures to reduce the impact on nearby agricultural areas. NEMA, our environmental authority, also said that you must spray water on the excavated areas so that there's no dust affecting the agriculture as well. The wind turbines, which were powering the water pumps for they basically power the water pumps for irrigation, so therefore helping the agriculture as well. And because the wind turbines were on such a low footprint, they would, it was, I think, 99.8% of the land was used for agriculture, with that 0.2 for the wind turbines. So again, livestock grazing could happen. They found a nice coexistence of agriculture and power. We've got geothermal plants as well, which are interesting. Geothermal power is when hot water, energy is produced from the ground, really, through springs, etc. The hot water produced is a byproduct, and that can be used for heating greenhouses and assisting with agriculture that way. Equally, we have the photovoltaics, which is very exciting. Our Rift Valley Roses have commissioned a floating solar power plant. So you've got like a water body with floating solar panels on it, and water from the reservoir is used for agriculture, for irrigating flower farms. And then the energy from the solar panels powers that farm. So that's very exciting in Kenya. Niji talked about agrivoltaics. Where you have solar panels they could be on the top, mounted on the top, and then crops grown underneath. That actually does happen in Kenya. We've had an area in Isinya that's doing that. So, and particularly that example is really key in Kenya, because not only do the panels shade the crops underneath, but also they have little gutters in them. So when it rains, they collect the water, they harvest the water, and that water can also be used as part of the agriculture to assist in that agriculture. The panels also reduce the water loss, through evaporation, and so it sort of works hand in hand together. We've successfully grown cabbage, kale, eggplant, maize. That's very interesting in the Kenyan context. We've got hydro plants where there's a dam and there's water in the dam that you can control how much water is released from the dam. So the dam makes is used for the power for the power plant, and it allows the controlled release of the water so that can be used for irrigation purposes, etc. I mean, we have an example where there is a particular dam which is used to help farmers as well, because our sort of authorities basically make sure that there's a lot of fish in there. And so the farmers have an opportunity to farm the fish as well, and they keep replenishing the fish, which is very nice. So in that way, they can coexist again. A different type of farming, fish farming, but it's all sort of farming together. And the latest one, I'm very pleased to say, is green hydrogen. We had the Africa Climate Summit last year in Kenya, and Kenya launched its green hydrogen strategy and roadmap. So as part of the green hydrogen, you can, green ammonia is a byproduct, and it's basically used in the manufacture of fertilizer. So that's a very exciting space to be in, because fertilizer, of course, helps helps grow plants, and crops. So we're I think let me hand over back to the speaker, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. That's very exciting. Before I let Pastor Itwa take his jab at you, just clarify, did you say 80% of energy generated in Kenya is from renewable source?
Yes, that's right, over 80%.
Over 80%.
Yeah.
Over what period was this achieved? Because I know most of Africa used to generate energy from thermal,
So we had our first geothermal plant about 30 years ago. So it's been, I think that was the first geothermal plant, and then all the other renewables have followed. So as far as I'm aware, yes, it's taken, but we've got rivers, we've got hydro, so all that, we're getting very close to 100.
Okay, no, I mean that's quite interesting, because not even in the West they still use a lot of energy, other sources of energy. So what is it that Kenya is doing? And I will come to you, Mr. Nijioni. What is it that is helping Kenya to achieve such a high level? And you said this is the case also in most of the East African countries, that they also rely a lot on renewable energy sources. I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Oni can correct me, that we have attained anything close to that in Nigeria, because I know that most of our plants are still highly dependent on fossil fuel that we use to generate energy for most of our plants. What is it that Kenya is doing that other Africans can learn? And you said you had a summit also last year in Kenya, were all the countries there? What was the discussion? What was the agreement? How far is it being implemented across board? Is there any monitoring group to see how this is happening?
Sure. Well, yes, you're right. Kenya had the climate summit last year. We also had the energy forum last year. So energy, climate finance, all this is very, very dear to Kenya's development. We signed the Paris Agreement, and we're basically trying to achieve the goals and even surpass what we had promised under the Paris Agreement. So I'm glad to say a lot of sort of sustainable issues and a lot of goals for renewables, etc., are in the process of being achieved. They're very key to Kenya, and to sort of help that and accelerate that, we've got a lot of legislation which governs and a lot of tax breaks, a lot of legislation, and investors are very happy to invest as well. So that's another sort of advantage of developing and ability to develop renewables in Kenya. Finance, investors want to finance. The Kenyan sort of business regime is very encouraging to developers coming in and setting up power plants, with the assistance there. So I think that's some of what has helped us accelerate and become green.
That's interesting. Okay. Before I come to you, Mr. Oni, and most of these power plants are privately owned, right?
Yes, yes, and there's it's actually they're PPPs in that sense that they have to work hand in hand with government because our off-taker is a state corporation. So yes, they will be privately owned power plants, but they contract with our off-taker, which is which is a state corporation, and everyone tries to work together.
All right, great. Thank you very much for that. So, Mr. Oni, where are we in Nigeria, and what progress are we making, towards this renewable energy attainment?
Well, what I would have said first of all is that you don't need to come back to me because, like I said, I've been joking since myself have been to have this conversation that I was very happy that she started the presentation before me. Then I had nothing to do other than just to hide my presentation that day because Kenya has gone really, really, really far. So I had to just speak without using my presentation. To basically answer the question, in Nigeria, I would say we're very much crawling at the moment in terms of agrivoltaics or even having a combination of renewable energy and agriculture. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the land space, we have the arable land. So even though this whole initiative came about as a way to manage the land in the Western world, as I'll put it, there was a way to bring about this coexistence. In Africa, and particularly Nigeria, we have not even utilized most of the arable lands that we have in the first instance. However, even though that is not necessarily, the land is not necessarily a problem for us, there are certain states that, have so much sunlight that, and they are not able to also produce agro crops, around the entire year. And with having this combination will do nothing other than to protect it. I mean, we've heard from the Kenya concept whereby even the agrivoltaics will also provide water to the farm. So where in the northern area of Nigeria, for example, where that, water can also be a problem, these are things that can provide year in, year out agricultural produce. But in terms of how we're moving in Nigeria, I would say we're still very much behind and not yet there, but the concept it's already there. It's just for us to begin to find a way to implement it through providing policies. Bintu talked about the Land Use Act, or the land use laws. In Nigeria, we still have that problem because our land, even though some state government decide to delegate or some part of land in the state for agriculture, but most of these things is not necessarily provide because the land we don't necessarily have a agricultural land apart from if it's provided by a policy of government, which most of the time do not survive the next government. So if we start maybe by amending our Land Use Act, for example, to create for agricultural land, maybe that could be another way around it. But we're still very far behind in terms of bringing out legal frameworks for coexistence of agriculture and renewable energy.
Okay, great, thank you. But when you say we are far behind, are there moves? Is there anybody, pressure group, like talking to government, trying to formulate policy? Is there a timeline as like from the African Summit that was held in Kenya last year? Usually there's a communique at the end of this kind of summit, encouraging people to say this is the way to go, it should be achieved by so time. In Nigeria, what is that body and how far are they going in terms of getting the legislation in place to drive the investment in this renewable energy sector?
Yeah, yes, you're very right in terms of, following the COPA, there's been, even in the last administration, there's been quite a lot of initiatives. There have been policy, should I say, agreements and MOUs that have been signed to allow for this renewable energy to kickstart in various parts of the country. So yes, there's been different initiatives, but has it been put in place like that of Kenya? I mean, none that I've seen so far.
What's preventing that? Why is that not happening?
Well, I think it's basically the same problem we're having with agriculture. I like the question that you asked, Bintu, which was about whether most of these things are privately owned. In Nigeria, one of the major problems, which I know spread across Africa, is that we run a structure called smallholder farmers. And the smallholder farmer structure that we have, most of these farmers are not even able to provide or have their necessary seedlings to be able to have a very large quantity of yield, which is why, yes, we have arable land, but most of them are not even being cultivated. So there's lack of investments across, even from agriculture, not to not talk of having a renewable energy coexist with agriculture. So I would say one of the major reasons is finance. And the reason why is because there is most of the finance institution would, like I always say, will have a checklist, and the agricultural sector or possibly maybe renewable sector, will probably fail in most of that part, and that's the reason why it's usually very hard for a lot of financial institutions to channel finance into that sector or into those sectors.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks. Let me let you off for now. Let me detour Pastor Itwa, if you have more follow-up questions for them, or if Jumoke is on the platform, you have follow-up questions for them before we go to the group. Usually the way we do this is we'll have questions, because I'm sure there are a lot of interested professionals on the platform today that would like to either contribute or ask you some questions.
Very well.
Jumoke?
Oh, I don't have any questions. I think the only thing I would be interested in would be the educational component of this renewable energy and agriculture, seeing that most of our farmers, as you said, they're across the nation. What is the strategy to really educate them on the process of this renewable energy and agriculture? That would be the only question I have.
Well, I think for me, in terms of trying to educate the farmers, it's basically, almost all the farmers that you have across the nation have some sort of level of community. They have different associations. It's letting them understand that, what benefit this would have on their crops. I'll give you a simple example. I talked about tomato having 80% go to waste. There was the time we were part of a committee in terms of looking at how agro-produce would meet up with the EU standard. And some of the basic things we found out was that the EU standard simply says tomatoes, put them in a plastic bag. I'm just giving that as an example. But you find out that the tomatoes are being put in baskets. Now, that comes with some sort of food hygiene and things like that. So it will not be accepted in Europe, or will not be accepted for exportation. So it's about educating them as to the benefits that this combination will have in terms of increasing their yield and the things to do and the things not to do. So, there can be no other way other than to penetrate the farmers through their respective association and then enlighten them as to how some of these things can work. And possibly like the northern part of Nigeria, whereby there's so much sunlight, it's all about seeing the results. Once you do it with the first state or you do it with the first farm association and they begin to see the result that, oh yes, I can grow this type of crop year round, having this combination, preventing the direct sunlight, and having some shade on the farm, and also increasing or reducing the number of water that is needed to grow the agro-produce across. So yes, education, but at the same time, it's about, who takes the first step and they're able to see the results.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, from a Kenyan law perspective, the way it works is when somebody wants to put up a power plant, they engage with the community, and you know the farmers or the community themselves are pretty, you know, they have to speak to the community, etc., get their sort of buy-in in a way, because they set up schools, you know, encourage with the farming, teach them new techniques, just so that the community has sort of skin in the game, because they know that they'll be working in the power plant, you know, they'll have jobs, but equally they'll have their own agriculture, they have their own patches, how to improve that. There is a lot of give and take with the developer of the power plant. So it sort of goes hand in hand, because, you know, they have skin in the game eventually, because they might get so many benefits from having the power plant on that land. So you're right, yes, stakeholder engagement, community engagement, and that sort of keeps the education process going.
Thank you. So maybe one question I have to follow up with that would be, do they, I mean, in Kenya, for example, do they have organizations that are focused on education, on renewable energy and agriculture, because that's their area of specialty? So do you have organizations like that?
There's many initiatives in Kenya, and even from outside Kenya. So for example, at the moment, green hydrogen is very new in Kenya. So we have lots of interest in foreigners, you know, coming in. The Germans want to teach us, want to educate the public on you know, how to use the green hydrogen, how to make fertilizer. So there's a lot of initiatives that way within Kenya on education and upskilling everyone, really. So yes.
Thank you. That's probably something we would like to follow up with you on, just to get more information on that. Thank you so much. Over to you, Pastor Sonny.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much. I think we'll begin to prepare to take a few questions. It's like Kenya has quite developed this thing and they are moving forward. The question I would like to ask, however, before we open up the floor is, the current president of the African Development Bank was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. And when he was, there were a lot of things that he did, and maybe Mr. Oni can help us with that. And then I'll come to you, Binti. There were a lot of praises for the initiative he put forward, as in mobile use of phone for agriculture, and everybody thought he had done such a great job. Fast forward to a few years down the line, you know, nobody seemed to be talking about it. So is it that it was just a flash in the pan? What happened to that whole initiative when he was Minister of Agriculture? And then now that he's head at the African Development Bank, how supportive is he of this whole initiative across Africa to make sure? Because last week we had a gentleman who was talking about finance being a challenge on the platform for renewable energy in Africa.
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't want to go into any criticism of anybody's administration or, you know, their position at any particular time. I, you know, catch up with the news as much as possible in terms of agriculture, and I've seen that the bank has been, you know, through its leadership, has initiated quite a lot of initiation around agricultural funding. But I think we should look at it from one point. The first thing is that most farmers that you have are not necessarily as educated as what you would think about. Most of, I mean, from experience in, you know, advising in agricultural space, you know, it's difficult for you most of the time to have a conversation or tell them that you're going to provide them with some funding. So an average farmer, if you provide them with, like I said, it's smallholder farmers. So most of them are growing this agro produce, you know, for them to be able to, you know, survive to first start with. Now, if they were meant to produce 100 for their own personal survival, and they now produce 300. You know, they're going to look for how to sell the 200 to the community or to anybody who is ready to take it. You know, that's just simply how it works. Now, if you then provide them with funds that possibly is going to total the yield of the 200, you know, most of the time, most of them are looking at it that it's going to be my money. Let me just take it. There's no point growing anything. I might as well continue to grow. Now, you have issue of identity. You cannot identify them. You don't know possibly where they live. You can't even go to the farmland in the first place. So having those initiatives, you know, and just throwing funds into that pool, personally, I think, you know, it's not going to work. Now, what is possibly the solution? Yes, community engagement. I mean, there are Obas and kings, you know, across all this community. There are, you know, policies and even agreements, which I possibly even have drafted some to show that, you know, when investors are coming, they're going to build this and do some infrastructure structure. But one of the best solution that I've looked at is, you know, not doing a direct finance to the farmers, more or less like an indirect finance, but providing these incentives, you know, through some sort of channel. Like you can provide them with seedlings, you can provide them with everything that is needed to grow this agricultural plant from start. But at the same time, upon harvest, you know, they are being paid or they are being provided with incentives that allow them to satisfy themselves as a person or their immediate family. And what does that mean? You know, schooling, you know, proper access to other types of markets. And once we begin to do that, and we begin to educate the farmers, what you then would have is that the off-takers, which most of the time are usually international, will begin to find a way, because if you don't have substantial number of off-takers, no matter how much you put into any agricultural structure within the country, it's probably, you know, not going to do anything. Yes, 80% of our tomato harvest goes to waste. We're still consuming 20. Out of the 20, if you convert it into 100, 60% of it is consumed locally. So the other 20 will probably maybe find its way to get out of the country for one way or the other. But if the off-takers begin to trust the entire process up onto from cultivation, and I'm talking about still other parts of agriculture. So begin to trust that entire system, then there can be more funding. And if there is security that is created across that entire value chain from planting, then the off-takers will begin to trust the system. And trust comes, you know, finance comes with trust, trust comes with finance. And that's possibly the best way to begin to solve this problem. So yes, there are initiatives, you know, from the national or from the ministry, that initiative internationally, from African development banks, and I'm sure they keep coming up with different solutions. But these are issues, the grassroots issues that needs to be resolved, you know, for us to be able to start seeing solutions.
Okay, thank you very much. We will open it up for Q&A, and Jumoke will handle that session. Jumoke Akin-Taylor.
Thank you, Pastor Sonny. Do we have any questions? I don't see any hands. Okay, go ahead, Pastor. So the way we usually coordinate the questions and answers is would have 2 or 3 questions grouped together, and then you would take those questions. But right now we have only one hand up. So I'll go ahead and take Pastor Tayo. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
I am. Thank you very much. I think I just wanted to bring to notice that Nigeria has policies and plans for renewable energy. There is a national renewable energy and energy efficiency policy that has not been actually effectively adopted, number one. Number two, there's also a national renewable energy action plan developed in 2016, and it lays out what Nigeria plans to do between 2015 and 2030. Just like Pastor Sonny asked, The challenge with Nigeria is continuity. We have the plans in place. Funding is actually not the problem. Finance is not the problem. The issue is implementing the appropriate policies and following the plans that have been drawn up. We're at COP27 in Egypt. There are some declarations made by every government or every nation that was represented. We need to hold government accountable onto plans and policies that are developed and are just put on shelves. I think that is where Kenya and other African countries are proven to work better. Our presenter also mentioned the public-private partnership. We're not maximizing public-private partnership initiatives. We also have a national policy on public-private partnership, particularly relating to energy, agriculture, and infrastructure. But we are very, very low and weak in implementation and follow-through. When a new government comes in, they abandon the plans that have been made with a lot of investment of human effort. And so that is our challenge. The challenge is to look at what we have developed as plans and policies and ensure that they are implemented at appropriate times. The funding is out there, both on the regional level and then on the public-private partnership venture capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, before you respond to that, we had invited the Office of the Minister of Environment. I wanted to ask if members of his team are on the platform. Apologies, I wanted them to signify that they were here. We invited a few of them and the PA said they were going to be here. So, okay, we'll continue. Do you want to take that question or do you want me to take another question before you respond?
I'm okay to respond.
Okay.
I think, yes, like I mentioned, Fana, you have also mentioned, there are policies, there are frameworks, there are different initiatives, there are different agencies. I always say that there are so many laws in Nigeria that you'll be surprised that there is a law for the way you should smile. But I don't necessarily want to put the blame on the government because we continue to do that almost every time. And we've heard from the Kenya point of view that most of these things are being implemented by private sectors. Now, how does the private sector really trust the system? It's obviously when there are legal frameworks or when there are some sort of initiatives that have been done. Now, that being said, I believe that, and this is me personally, believe that if private sectors begin to take the initiatives and begin to act, it will only be for the government to start forming these policies. The research of this agrovoltaics, for example, started from a laboratory in Germany. And if we continue this session, I can even bring up issues around human rights of this, environmental. I'm happy that you mentioned that people from the Ministry of Environmental is here. And I won't be surprised if they also have their own policies also too. But the implementation of it will only come if, or the drive, or the amendment, or the, whatever vocabulary can be used, will only come once the private sector starts taking their initiatives around these things. And most of the time, like I said, how the private sector trying to channel towards the agricultural produce to start up with. We have very mass arable, but the problem starts from the farmers. How do you keep educating them to ensure that if they dance to this tune, then we are able to grow this. Once that is done, I don't see why government will wake up at any party. You'll be surprised that there'll be a lot of taxes and things like that will begin to implement. So I like to always move away from government at first, but to push into how and challenge individuals and corporate organizations.
Thank you. We invited them, but I don't know if they are here yet. And they did indicate that they were going to join us today. So that's why I stated that if they were here to please signify by raising their hand or sending us a comment. I'm going to take Professor Nike Grange and Tola Obiyemi. I'll take those two together. Go ahead, Ma.
Thank you very much, Jumoke. I have 3 questions. One of them has to do with what do we have in terms of creating a database for developing policies and interventions in this area. Nigeria, usually doesn't have so much of a database. I just wonder whether in the agricultural sector, they managed to achieve that. Secondly, what is the intention of government in encouraging agriculture in Nigeria? Is it for us to become self-sufficient in food production? Or is it for us to be able to market our food regionally and internationally? I think, if we can answer this, we'll be able to compare what we are doing with Kenya. I know that Kenya has gone so far that they are currently even marketing their food products regionally and internationally, and thereby getting more revenue from that. Thirdly, the recent challenge that we have in terms of security needs to be addressed. That is in farming, especially where the farmers don't feel secure. I think, this cannot be swept under the carpet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I have Tola Obiyemi, please?
Okay, good evening, everyone. So I'm just wondering if these things are really possible in Nigeria, because it looks very vague, policies, laws, and all that. But it looks like we can't even achieve anything of such here. I have a company that deals in agriculture. We got a loan from CBN over 300 and something million to produce rice. The first thing that affected us was security. And we couldn't get those things out of where we were producing. And the company was almost like folding. They came again and said, okay, we can give you 1.2 billion. They gave us the offer, but the bank won't issue it because of so many reasons that they want, So that got us discouraged, and we had to stop for a while, and quite a lot. So in Southwest, we are the first company that gave such an amount of money. That's CBN, the Agric and all that, because even the former CBN said it when it came around to Oyo State. And so private sectors, they want to play, but believe me, playing in this industry with the situation right now in the country, I really don't, unless you are maybe like the Otedolas and all that, that can lose billions and still, keep going. I don't know how. Can you just make it more practical? Just tell us like how possible, let's forget policy. Tell us how possible it is to play in this industry, please.
Thank you. So you have those 3 questions, and I believe Mr. Obiyemi's question was part of Professor Grange's 3rd question. So do you have those questions, or do you want me to read them back to you?
Can you read them again? I know both of them border around security, but can you?
Yeah. So the first one was, do we have database on policies on agriculture in Nigeria? And then the second one is, what's the government's intention in encouraging agriculture? Is it for self-sustenance, internal consumption, or is it for export? And then the third one was issues around insecurity and famine. And I believe Mr. Obiyemi also spoke about that and his own his company's personal experience with not having success because of insecurity. And if you could speak to those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first question, which has to do with database of policies, unfortunately, well, none that I know of, there's no policy or there's no database that has all the policies or laws together. There are quite a number of them. I mean, some we continue to find out on a daily basis, some in which, from a legal point of view, you say it's conflicting. I mean, that was one of the paper that was pushed to the ministry to advise the ministry that some of them, there's need for harmonization of some of those policies. There are quite a number of them. I mean, from a firm point of view, we're happy to share the non-exhaustive list, if I may classify it that way, at any particular time. In terms of government trying to encourage agriculture or trying to promote exploitation, again, there are no laws that are made or put in place that every individual or corporate organization don't find as an hindrance. But I think the major problem that I would say exists that maybe might not necessarily be encouraging in itself is that we do not necessarily have what we would say is constitutionally or statutorily protected, that is agricultural farmland. And oftentimes we've seen how that could create an issue between the owners of the farmland and the farmers themselves. So I mean, it doesn't make any business or commercial sense to keep purchasing land. So the best you can do is to have a lease. And we actually had a client that decided to take up a lease of 15 years to cultivate some agricultural produce somewhere in Oyo State. And I led the team into going all the way into the village, to the Kabisi and everything. And at the same time, we did our own search at the land registry. And we also found out that the land was registered, he had a certificate of occupancy, but we had our doubt because of obviously the way the legal system is structured in Nigeria, particularly when it comes to land. Not necessarily because you have a C of O means that you have a good title. So one of the things we decided to do was to come up, with the agreement in such a way that we were focusing on protecting the crops rather than just taking the lease as it is. That yes, we have a lease, we have a C of O, and that's it. And even though we're in possession, so the agreement was drafted to protect the crops, and we decided to put up different policies and different structure in such a way that we will protect our clients. And 1 year down the line, even though we had visited the king, the villagers, and done everything, only for the next village to actually institute an action in court, claiming ownership of the land through historical background. And the first thing we did and what I wanted to do was to get an injunction against us. Yes, I mean, we were able to not allow that injunction to be granted. But the most important point I want to make from that is that, and that boils down to the aspect of if it was an agricultural, statutorily protected land, maybe the situation might be different. If you've cultivated and spent billions of naira or millions of naira or dollars, as the case may be, and you have, this thing hanging over your head that any day, any time, an action can be instituted in court, and due to the way the Land Use Act is structured. So I think that creates a very, very issue for people that play within that particular space. And that's whether that would then result in us saying, the government is definitely not doing the best to promote agriculture in itself. I mean, that's another way to look at it. In terms of security, which I believe is the last question that bothers me is now, I like the way you phrased it, that let's come down to the level and let's leave this whole policy and how do we tackle it. In honesty, I think the first problem of security in Nigeria whether it is North or South or, Yorubas or the Northerners. I think the first problem is education. The second is possibly poverty. Now, some people will say that most of the insecurity is funded through there's a lot of speculation. But I believe that if people are well educated and well informed, we can begin to reduce the level of insecurity that we have in the country or that is affecting the farmers. I won't mention the name of the company. One of their models is aggregation of agro-produce. And so they employ agents to go ahead and go and aggregate agro-produce for them. Most of the time, these agents don't come back. And one is that they go away with the money. Two is that they are killed on the farm. Three is that they just decide to sell it to the highest bidder. This problem happens every time. And the best way, I believe, to solve it is to begin to enlighten people, but not just only enlighten people, also creating some sort of benefit for people to be able to see. If a farmer begins to see that his child is being protected, the family is having the best available education, or having, like I said earlier on, that you give them money to go and use this agro-produce. The best thing they'll do is that if the money is substantial enough, there's no point planting. But if you begin to create incentives for them, and these incentives are, they're true to what they say, not just an agreement that is signed by the Oba or signed by the king, but there's some sort of implementation that will begin to reduce the insecurity that we have in the country. I mean, that's the best structure. Yes, we still need the support of the government, but the individuals or the corporate organization need to start doing most of these things. One of the models that happened in the Oyo State one that we advised on was to employ the locals again as the farmers on the land, even though there was some sort of lease, and to begin to give them some sort of incentives that will encourage the farmers and their generation or their dependents, as the case may be. So yes, if we want to really, really break it down into that and simplify it, it's if I'm a person and I live in the village and you come in with your bulldozer, you come in with your heavy equipment, and you're not doing anything to me, and somebody comes in and says, if you kidnap this person, you get this ransom. I mean, it's very easy for me to do that. Just being human. So I hope I've been able to simplify it as to the best possible solution I can think of, or that I believe that should work, because we have so many arable lands, so many agro-produce that is just lying down on the ground waiting for exportation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
May I have Honorable Bimbo Ashiru, please? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy about the discussion today because mine is not a question. Mine is just to make some comments and probably add more to some point. You see, I think we get to mix this thing up at times. I served in the state as the Commissioner for Commerce and Industry, and I had to bring in investors. And something happened. I mean, when government acquired land, they acquired land from government, probably for agriculture or whatever it is, override public use. And you go and pay to the government to get, let's say, about 1,000 hectares of land. When you go to that farm, then government will now tell you, after paying for that, you need to pay for crop enumeration for the owners of the business, the people that are doing something there, which is normal. But having done that, you still have the KBACs to deal with. I'm telling you, I mean, I just came back from a town in my place that I have to go and talk to the KBACs, meet all of them. And if you pay for the government enumeration. And once you pay for that, then they will call all the landowners, the claim landowners to come and stand by their land, measure the lands, and you give them checks. But what we introduce is to take a video of all of them so that you won't deny it. That is there. Then secondly, the candidates were not going to benefit from that land. You get my point? But the point I'm trying to raise now is that you cannot, if you go to the Omoniles, the candidates and buy the land, you're also going to contend with the government, which is very key. So it's better for you to go to the government, you buy it, then you pay for the enumeration compensation, then you go and settle the candidates. That's what I've just gone to do. So that is another issue. Then the issue of kidnapping or no kidnapping, the problem is this. Our focus in Nigeria should be agriculture that will lead into industrialization. We're not focusing on that because all these are boys are now doing Okada. So how do we bring them back to school to do that? That's the major thing. So the other areas I'm looking at, I don't think any government policy or this or that will help anything because they're not going to drive it. I mean, growing up, we know about agriculture. I mean, if the fund from cocoa that used to build cocoa house we are talking about today, 25 if Jifawolo and go there, and those are things because their focus was on agriculture and they have cocoa industries and everything. So my own point is that you need government and you need your money left. So you have been in between the two evils. We just need to manage them. Without just my own, because I'm involved. As I'm talking to you, I'm going again next week to go and meet them so that we can move to the field. But you need to manage them and you need to manage government. So you are in between the two levels. So that's just my own conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any response to that comment? Because I don't see any hands up yet.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any hands up. But I want to ask a follow-up question in terms of, I think Professor Grange's second question was export. If the government's intention was for internal consumption or for export. And if it's for export, if we have any rules or policies on exportation, do we have regulatory agencies that have specifications on the grade? The reason I say that, there is, I'm here in California, and there is a Nigerian who, Ola, I'm sure everyone knows, and he started his plant out of Nigeria producing a lot of the dry foods that we are able to eat. But because of challenges with some of these regulations, a lot of his products were rejected for just here in the US. And so he had to change his strategy and move his production outside the country. So can you speak a little bit about that? And also with the high level of food insecurity, why isn't promoting agriculture, supporting local farmers priority? So those are two questions for me while we wait for others to raise their hand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the first one, there are agencies, there are laws that guide the entire agricultural process, be it cultivation or even livestock. But the problem that we usually have, and that's why someone like the person you mentioned will have, trading in a Western world, is that most of the time, I think the best way I would do is just to break it and just be very simple about it. Most of what you have now in the Western world is simply said that they need what is called an identity. Can I identify your produce? And what do I mean by that? Where was it grown? What kind of treatment did you give to it? What kind of, do you have all the necessary certifications that you need to have, in order for you to show some level of history? And that's what everyone wants to have, because why? When you go to retail stores, whether Walmart or the Tesco's or any of those places, you begin to see descriptions about most of these things, whether it is organic, whether the eggs is free range, or any of those things. You begin to see it. And sometimes there could even be barcodes that could tell you exactly what farmer and what day it was planted. Now, those information, they are not able to get from an agricultural produce from Nigeria most of the time. And that is usually what will create the problem for anybody trying to offtake or trying to even, or who has processed it and trying to actually sell it, to a more developed country or Western world. And to now track back a bit, yes, the policies are there. Like I mentioned earlier on, there are conflicting policies. There's no doubt that will always happen in any country. So most of the times people will feel that, this is quite a lot. So one of the things that we've advised the Ministry of Agriculture is for harmonization of some of these laws, because you find out that the same state is being duplicated across so many agencies or across so many government agencies. So if there is some level of harmonization, I mean, those laws were identified for harmonization. If there is that part of harmonization, that's one thing. Now, if we say we want to wait for harmonization, we can continue to talk about why harmonization will take a bit of a while to be executed. And the reason is simple. The moment a policy or a law is made, you create an agency or you create an MDA. Now, the first thing you do if you want to harmonize is that, are you going to collapse that particular agency or MDA? That becomes another problem on its own. Now, if most of the farmers or anybody playing within the space at least is able to score 80% of the checklist, or even 75% of the checklist, I believe that we can begin to see more acceptance of our agro-produce. You have now a lot of people from India or Asia, I should say, would take some of our produce from here, claim it or process it in their respective country, and then export it to Europe because it's been refined. They have the financial capability to do that. But because most of our farmers will look at it that, or maybe most of the people that play within the industry that, okay, I'm selling it to you at $10. But meanwhile, they could actually have sold it for $100. But because they're not able to provide certain certification or, able to meet up to the standard, then that way, they just decide to buy it off from us at any particular time. I'll just cite one example on that particular point. Essential oil. Nigeria has one of the best rating for essential oil, but it's been difficult for clients that I know to get the certification for essential oil. And essential oil is what you majorly use for perfumes and things like that. And that's because maybe that could not be because governments are not pushing for, some global acceptance of agro-produce within the country. So maybe that. And I think the second question is on food security, if I am correct.
No, I was just asking, and I think it's just a comment, so it really isn't a question. So thank you.
No problem.
If I can just bring Binti back into this conversation, thank you so much for addressing that. And I think Kenya is doing very well. They're exporting their products. So can you speak a little bit about how Kenya is able to, and to Mr. Oni's point, this identity that the international community or international world standards require? Kenya has been successful in doing that. Can you speak a little bit about Kenya's strategy and approach?
Sure.
Thank you.
I mean, a lot of it is we're very resource rich in that sense. I mean, our tea is world famous, our coffee is world famous. So from, our flowers are exported very regularly. So the product itself, a lot of the time speaks for itself, but equally, yes, we are compliant with what, the destinations that we export to require. And, it's a question of just complying with what they want in that sense. In terms of development in Kenya for sort of agriculture, etc., you were mentioning finance at some point, etc. I mean, what we've seen certainly is the Western world. A lot of the DFIs give loans to our banks, who then sort of, and the purpose is specifically to lend onto SMEs and MSMEs for them to, develop agriculture, etc. So it could be two-pronged, so they would have goals to achieve. If you produce X amount of produce, etc., your interest rate will go down, or there's some sort of incentives, and so that's been quite helpful to developing the agricultural sector here, the smaller sector, the SMEs and the MSMEs. Sort of blended finance possibilities. I mean, also, for example, our tea, we have associations whereby smallholder farmers sort of get together and they're under an umbrella of a larger institution, etc. And these sort of things help in eventually the export process. Food insecurity is a big thing in Kenya as well. It is one of our goals long term, to have enough food security for the population. That continues despite the exports, etc. So it is one of Kenya's goals that they're trying very hard to achieve. A lot of Kenya is developed from that perspective as well. We have digital lending, for example, where lending happens over mobile phones. So to your farmer out in the rural areas, it's great. They don't have to go to a physical bank. They can get their money on a mobile phone and use that money to develop, their crops, etc. Also, I mean, those phones, we've had somehow in Kenya, we've had a culture that mobile phones have basically gone throughout the country. I mean, they with our M-Pesa and Safaricom, we've managed to cover a lot of the country and with the other mobile providers as well. So farmers use their phones to do a lot. We have apps whereby they'll be advising farmers that, look, today is, a frosty day or something, or make sure this could be what's wrong with your crop if these are the symptoms of your crops, etc. So those type of initiatives from the private sector do help, because the landowner can just use their app on their mobile phone and access all this data and all the assistance. The more lucrative sort of market has even got AI now, whereby you have drones taking photos of tea plantations, saying there's frost coming tomorrow, you better actually pick up or whatever, do something today. So in that sense, technology has helped Kenya a lot in terms of developing its market for export as well.
Thank you. And I have just one more comment or question, and then you can address that. And I like the way you talked about the involvement of the private sector, so bringing it from the macro level to the micro level. And we do have laws and policies in Nigeria, but for some reason it's working very well in Kenya. So can you speak about the citizens' involvement, right? We as the people, what our role is in contributing to the success of these policies and laws that govern agriculture, because it would be good to hear that, because it's one thing for the government to make these policies, it's another thing for it to be complied with and implemented. So if you can speak about how Kenyans are responding or contributing to the success of agro.
Yeah, I mean, again, like Niji said, it's education, and sort of trial and error, because if a farmer tries something and succeeds and makes money out of it, it's exciting. He'll tell his neighbor, and then you do better and you'll do more. And it's not an overnight success. It takes years for these things to happen, but it's the interest of everyone to live better, you know, to have the food security, etc., that motivates the people, I think. And trial and error is the best teacher, I think. So when the government has, you know, and it's not necessarily government-led, there are often PPP initiatives where the private sector, you know, work together with government, or it may be a private sector working with a state corporation, or just private sectors all getting together and you know, coming under an umbrella. It can take various forms, not necessarily one or the other, but yeah, we're lucky. I mean, I'm not saying we don't have our issues, I'm sure we do. I think every country does.
Every country has its
Yes.
issues and challenges.
But you know, there is a lot good happening as well.
Yeah, we'll probably follow up with you to just see the role of civil society in this sector and what they're doing in Kenya. So we'll follow up with you on that one. Thank you. I don't have any more questions, and I think I see only one hand up. I'll hand over to Mr. President after Professor Grange's question. Go ahead, Ma, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you. It's not a question. It's just to endorse what you have been saying about citizens' involvement. I believe that when we go down to grassroots level, we have to let them see the link between what is happening in their household and the lack of agricultural development. That obviously is what is going to motivate them to allow agriculture to develop in the right way. I'm talking about, you know, malnutrition in children. The stunting rate is about 30% in Nigeria. And this has to be seen in the light of the fact that lack of development, lack of growth and development of children actually stunts their mental capacity. So once we know this, and we can take it down to grassroots, and we can convince the Obas and, you know, all the people who are in charge of granting permission for use of land, etc., it may be helpful in getting the investors to move in and develop agriculture. So that link of lack of food security and the lack of growth and development of children is a very vital one for us to stress at the grassroots level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ma. So if I hear you, it's really a combination of educational benefits of nutrition and the ill effects if we don't take agriculture seriously. And that's probably the role of the citizens to be able to promote that at all levels. So I'm going to take you again, Mr. Obiyemi, and then I'll hand over to Mr. President. We're up on time, so we do need to close. Go ahead, sir.
It's just a quick one, because I just wanted to let him know, Mr. Oni, that we actually employed the locals in order to protect the farm. We employ them, we pay them well, and even the Obas, we took care of, we even made them the security around. It still didn't work. I'm just trying to tell you the bottlenecks and how difficult and complex it is to, you know, play in this environment sometimes without this full support of government.
Thank you.
Do you want me to respond to that? Or?
Please go ahead, and then I'll hand over to Mr. President as we begin to close.
Thank you very much. Yes, I understand. Like I said, you know, we crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. Yes, you know, like Vinta has also said, you know, to corroborate what I said, you know, you just have to continue. It's just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. It's not one day, but it's all about educating the people. And yes, it looks like it's at the expense of particular companies or, you know, those companies that are not able to push these things out. But again, one has to just continue to try to educate them. Yes, engaging the Obas, engaging everybody would have probably been a way to think that that's solving the problem, but we just have to continue to educate. Thank you.
Sorry, I muted myself by accident.
Okay.
So thank you. I was going to bring up Mr. President to close, but he may have dropped off and maybe signing back in. So I want to thank both of you so very much for your time here. It was very insightful and enlightening. But if we, Pastor Sonny, did you have additional comments before we close?
Absolutely not. I think they've done great justice, and thank you both for your time and sharing your knowledge and experience and what you think we should be doing. Just to say thank you and appreciate everyone else on the platform. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we will take closing remark from each of you. Binti, do you want to go first? What are your closing remarks? And Mr. Oni, your closing remarks and recommendations. It would be good to have a couple of recommendations from you on the way forward.
Well, just to close, thank you very much for having me on this. I've enjoyed listening as well to a different perspective in Nigeria. So it's been enlightening from that perspective. I think the takeaway would be that, well, improvement is desirable everywhere in Africa, but it is possible. And education seems to be the key in that, from my perspective, yeah. And to answer the original question that we were discussing, I do think that agriculture and renewable energies can coexist in Kenya, certainly, and in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Oni?
Thank you very much for having me again. I think what I'll close with is, I think, going by the topic, renewable energy coexisting with agriculture, I think is here to stay. And we'll continue to see more improvement as, as time goes on. We've been able to address a lot of issues, pertaining to Nigeria, and we've also put in some issues around from Kenya also too. To me, I believe that we can't do without agriculture, and we have no choice other than to continue to push forward in whatever way, educating and educating. But one recommendation I think I can drop in here, and this is based on what I've seen so far, is that, and maybe Mr. Odriemi might also, take this, is that one is, I think it's about time players within the industry stop working through every aspect of the sector. Every aspect of the chain. And what do I mean by that? You can't, corporations or individuals or companies cannot do it all. You can't fund logistics, you can't fund warehouse, you can't fund cultivation. There has to be a lot of collaboration. And that is why if you're being affected by a particular part of the value chain or the end where you are in, the survivor or trying to come back into business, it's what I would say is possibly a little bit limited. But if you are funding the entire value chain, which we usually see happens to, I'm not saying you in particular, but happens to a lot of people within the space, that is strenuous in itself. So I think while we're trying to educate every aspect, because if we sit down here, we've only talked about farmers, there's a lot of education that has to do with even the logistics itself. Even the warehouse, the drivers today, that can carry the agro produce from the farm and might not even deliver it to the destination. So there's a lot of problem across the entire value chain. But collaboration, education, I think is my possible recommendation in moving things forward. There are so many government policies that are available. We know how government can be, whether it's from an African point of view or even from the Western point of view. But once we begin to take these initiatives as individuals or corporations, I believe that the government would have no choice other than to follow suit. Thank you very much again, once again.
Thank you very much for your time. I believe, Pastor Sonny, any additional comments?
No, there's no, I think Pastor Eto'o is
he
not
back?
around.
No, I think we lost his network. His network was fluctuating.
Oh,
earlier.
okay, great. It's okay. Thank you, Binti. Thank you, Niji. Really, really enjoyed having this conversation, and I want to thank everyone on the platform. Next week is another time, same channel, or same link, as the case may be. Jumoke will give you further details as to how to continue to join us and be a part of what we are doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I put a link